Black general wrongly cuffed by cops until he makes one call to Pentagon and crushes their careers. It happened so fast. One moment, he was reaching for his wallet. The next, he was face first against his SUV, the cold steel of handcuffs biting into his wrists. 3 stars on his shoulder once meant something. But not here, not now, not to this officer. "You're making a mistake," the man said calmly. The officer leaned in and sneered. "Only mistake was thinking you belonged here." What the officer didn't know? The man he just cuffed was a high-ranking U.S. Army general, and the phone in his back pocket wasn't just any phone. One call, just one. And lives were about to change forever. It started like any ordinary summer afternoon. Elijah, dressed in a simple blue t-shirt and jeans, was driving through the back roads of Harrison Falls, Virginia. No convoy, no guards, just him, a beat-up SUV, and a plan to spend a few quiet days at his uncle's old fishing cabin. It had been years since he'd taken a break. This trip wasn't about work. It was about peace. The sun was sharp, and the heat was climbing. The car's AC struggled as he rolled past sleepy fields and winding roads. His gas tank hovered on empty, and finally a faded sign appeared. Murphy's Gas and Go. He turned in, parked beside one of the old pumps, and got out. Nothing about the place stood out. Faded ads on the windows, a dusty convenience store. The kind of small-town stop you'd forget 5 minutes after leaving it, but something felt off. 2 men near a pickup truck paused mid-conversation when they saw him. Their stares lingered a bit too long. Elijah didn't flinch. He'd seen that look before, sizing him up, judging, questioning. He gave them a polite nod and walked inside. Inside, the cool air hit his skin. The clerk behind the counter, a middle-aged man with a stained polo shirt and tired eyes, watched Elijah like a hawk. No words, just that long, suspicious stare. "Afternoon," Elijah said, grabbing a bottle of water from the fridge. "Just passing through?" the clerk finally asked, not even looking at the bottle as he scanned it. "Yeah. Heading up to Miller's Point for some fishing," Elijah replied, handing over a $5 bill. The man didn't smile, didn't say welcome. He just looked out the window at Elijah's SUV. "Been sitting there for a while? You planning to buy gas?" Elijah kept his tone even. "Was checking the map first. I'm filling up before I leave." The clerk didn't respond. He handed over the change and watched as Elijah walked back outside. It was one of those moments you don't realize is the start of something until it's too late. As Elijah began pumping gas, he glanced back inside. The clerk was on the phone, staring at him, speaking low. Elijah's instincts sharpened. Something wasn't right. He'd been in war zones. He knew what rising tension felt like. But this was his own country. He wasn't a threat. He wasn't doing anything wrong. Still, he knew when to be cautious. He didn't even finish fueling before the sirens came. 2 patrol cars pulled in hard, blocking his exit. Officers stepped out quickly, hands on holsters, jaws set, eyes full of suspicion. The lead officer, thick-necked and sunburned, barked, "Hands where I can see them!" Elijah was calm. "Is there a problem, officer?" "Suspicious activity," the officer snapped. "We got a call. Need to see some ID." Without sudden movement, Elijah reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet. Inside, his driver's license and his military ID. "I'm General Elijah Brooks, U.S. Army. On personal leave," he said, holding both out. The officer barely looked at them. "Step away from the vehicle," he ordered. "Officer," Elijah said slowly, "I've shown you my identification. I've done nothing wrong. Now," the officer interrupted, moving closer, "step away." Elijah's heart pounded, but not from fear, from restraint. He'd led operations in foreign countries, defused bombs, commanded thousands. But here, right now, none of that mattered. because in this small town, to this officer, he was just another black man at a gas pump. He turned slowly and placed his hands on the hood. Cold metal clamped over his wrists. "You're making a mistake," Elijah said, voice low, but steady. The officer leaned in, smug. "The only mistake was thinking you belonged here." Inside the patrol car, Elijah sat still. He looked down at the phone they'd missed in his pocket, his military-issued secure line. He pressed one button, a single call. "Security desk," a voice answered. "Falcon Lock," Elijah said quietly. "This is Brooks. Send it up the chain." And just like that, everything changed. Inside the patrol car, the silence was thick. The engine hummed, the air conditioning barely cut the heat, and the officer behind the wheel, Sergeant Riggs, gripped the steering wheel like he was waiting for a fight. In the back seat, Elijah sat calmly, hands cuffed in front of him now. His breathing was steady, but his eyes, focused, cold, calculating. Riggs glanced at him through the rearview mirror. "So what's this Falcon Lock thing, huh?" he asked, trying to sound smug. "Calling your little army buddies for backup?" Elijah didn't respond, because he didn't have to. The call was already moving through layers of military intelligence. It wasn't a regular distress signal. It wasn't even a panic code. Falcon Lock was something else. An alert designed for one thing only: a threat against national security involving high-ranking personnel. Across the country, in a quiet, windowless office inside the Pentagon, a red light began blinking on a old terminal that hadn't been touched in years. Colonel Dana Winters was halfway through reading a cyber threat brief when the signal appeared. She froze. Falcon Lock. From Brooks. She didn't hesitate. She dropped the report, stood, and keyed a secure override into her terminal. "Route signal to Command Tier 6. Full trace. I want visual on Brooks. Now." Her assistant looked up, confused. "Sir, is that even active?" "It is now," she said. A map of Harrison Falls appeared on the screen. Small town. Barely a dot. But now, that dot was the center of a storm. Winters didn't need to ask what had happened. She knew. This wasn't random. This wasn't a coincidence. Reached for a secured phone and placed a call she never thought she'd have to make again. "We have a trigger," she said. "It's him." They found him. Back in Harrison Falls, Elijah stared out the window of the cruiser. The buildings passed slowly. A hardware store, a diner, a courthouse that looked like it hadn't seen a fresh coat of paint in 20 years. It was the kind of town that prided itself on being simple. But behind that smile, Elijah saw the signs. Too many surveillance cameras for a town this small. Too many unfamiliar license plates for the same block. And the mayor's office? He noticed it had private security stationed outside, something even cities 10 times the size didn't have. Something was off. Way off. At the edge of town, a modest brick building came into view. Harrison Falls Police Department. Riggs pulled up, slammed the car into park, and yanked open Elijah's door. "Let's go." Still cuffed, Elijah stepped out. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. He just looked up at the camera positioned above the station's entrance and gave a small, deliberate nod. Riggs didn't notice, but someone else did. Inside a secured monitoring room in D.C., that nod was seen live by a man in uniform. A silent signal. Brooks wasn't just detained. He was sending a message. Elijah was booked with no official charge. "Suspicious activity," someone muttered, acting strange near a gas pump. It was paper thin, and everyone in the room knew it. A young female officer hovered near the desk, her eyes flicking between the forms and the cuffs. She didn't say anything. Not yet. But her body language said enough. She knew this wasn't right. Elijah sat quietly, in the holding area, hands now resting on his knees, posture upright. His calm didn't come from arrogance. It came from experience. He'd been under fire. He'd watched empires rise and fall in war zones. He'd survived betrayals from enemies and allies alike. But this was different. This was home. And they had no idea who they were playing with. Back at the Pentagon, Colonel Winters had gathered a small, high-clearance team into a private room. She pulled up a classified file, untouched in nearly 2 decades. Obsidian Fence, a program once designed to monitor high-performing officers from underrepresented backgrounds. In reality, it was a surveillance net. One built on fear, on control, on the idea that Black excellence in high places was a threat that needed tracking. Brooks had exposed that program years ago. He had shut it down, or so they thought. Now new movement on that same file. And in the middle of it, Harrison Falls. "I don't believe this is just about racism," Winters said to her team. "It's part of something deeper, strategic, calculated. Someone was trying to disappear General Elijah Brooks, quietly, cleanly, before anyone noticed. But now, the world was about to notice." Winters turned to her assistant. "Tell Lutz, tell everyone who used to wear that patch. He's activated the chain. We go now." In Harrison Falls, Elijah sat alone. Then, a quiet buzz. The small military-issued phone slipped from his sleeve and into his palm. One more code, just 5 digits. He entered it. Across secure military servers, firewalls opened, back channels lit up, ghost protocols initiated, and files, old buried files, began crawling toward the surface. Elijah didn't need to lift a finger now. He had already pulled the trigger. And somewhere, deep in the government, someone realized this wasn't just a wrongful arrest. It was a war. And they had just awakened its most dangerous soldier. The police station smelled like old coffee, sweat, and something unspoken. Fear, maybe, or guilt. Hard to tell. Elijah sat on a hard metal bench, hands still cuffed. His posture? Perfect. Upright. Still. The kind of stillness you only see in people who've survived things most people never even imagine. He didn't speak. Not yet. Not to anyone. Because right now, he wasn't a general. He was just a man in a cell, dressed in jeans and a t-shirt, surrounded by small-town officers who thought they were in charge. They had no idea. But someone else did. Hundreds of miles away, a secured terminal at the Pentagon flashed a code that hadn't been seen in over a decade. When Colonel Winters saw it, she stood from her desk without a word, her mind already running a dozen steps ahead. Falcon Lock wasn't just a distress code. It was a signal that the system had failed one of its own. And the only people who had access to that code were the ones powerful enough to be erased. She opened a file she had kept buried for years. Not because it was irrelevant, but because it was dangerous. At the top of the file was one name, Elijah Brooks. Winters had served with him once, back when they were both still in the field. She remembered what kind of man he was. The kind who didn't bend, didn't play politics, didn't walk past injustice just because it wasn't in his orders. And 20 years ago, he did something that made him a quiet legend and a target. Back then, Elijah had uncovered an illegal unit operating inside U.S. borders. A black ops program built under the radar, made up of former soldiers acting as a private militia. Their mission? To preemptively neutralize so-called domestic threats. But their targets weren't criminals. They were community leaders, activists, minority voices, anyone who challenged the old power structure. Elijah didn't just report it. He shut it down. From the inside, he dismantled their funding, exposed their chain of command, had their operations defunded, their officers discharged, and their program buried. He ended them. Or at least, he thought he did. Now, here he was, alone in a jail cell in a town that wasn't even on most maps. And the moment he made that Falcon Lock call, Every ghost he ever thought he buried began waking up. At that very moment, Mayor Howard Wilson of Harrison Falls sat in his private office, phone in hand, watching Elijah on a security camera feed. His eyes weren't just watching, they were calculating, and his fingers moved fast across the screen as he sent a message to a private number. He's in. Time to proceed. That text didn't go to the state police. It didn't go to the governor. It went to someone much worse. Someone Elijah knew. Colonel Winters got the same alert from a military satellite just seconds later, an outgoing transmission. From Harrison Falls, flagged by an old encryption key. She felt a chill. She hadn't seen that code since the final shutdown of Obsidian Fence, the program Elijah had exposed years earlier. But if that code was still in use, it meant one terrifying thing. Someone had rebuilt the program in secret, and now they were using it to go after the very man who took it down. Meanwhile, back in the cell, Elijah finally spoke, just once, just loud enough for the young female officer sitting across the room to hear. "I know what this is," he said, quietly. "It's not about suspicion, it's not about law, it's about a message." She looked up, unsure. "You're Officer James, right?" he added gently. "You're new. You still believe in the badge." She didn't respond, but something in her face shifted. "I've worn a uniform longer than you've been alive. I know when it's real, and when it's a weapon." Outside the station, a black SUV idled across the street. Its windows were tinted, engine running. No one got out. No plates. No movement. Inside, Officer James stepped away from her desk and quietly walked to the back office. There, on a secondary terminal, she checked the arrest log. Nothing entered. Yet. No charges. No paperwork. He was being held unofficially. That wasn't protocol. That wasn't justice. That was a setup. Back at the Pentagon, Winters began pulling in names. Old contacts, disavowed agents, intelligence officers who once trained with Brooks. She didn't call it a task force. Not yet. She just said, "It's him. He's in trouble. Are you in?" One by one, the replies came back. "Whatever he needs. I owe him my life." Say the word. The pieces were moving now. The board was set. But Elijah? He wasn't just a piece. He was the player. He closed his eyes in the holding cell and took a slow breath. His wife, Angela, would know what to do. She'd already be working the legal angle. She always did. She was the fire he never showed. The fight that never stopped. He wasn't afraid. Because the people who'd done this, they made one mistake. They thought they could bury a man like him in a small town with fake charges and crooked power. They forgot something. You can't erase someone who already built the blueprint. You can't silence someone who wrote the oath, and you sure as hell can't break a man who already stood alone once. And won. Angela Brooks didn't pace when she was angry. She planned. The moment she saw the alert on her private secure line, not her work phone, not her home phone, but that line, her breath caught for half a second. Only one person could have sent that message, and only under one condition, Falcon Lock, Elijah. She locked the door to her home office, silenced everything else, and opened the terminal. Her hands didn't shake, not because she wasn't scared, but because she'd trained for this, not with weapons, not with drills, but with knowledge, with laws, with systems. She was a civil rights lawyer who had taken on governors and corporations, and won. But this was personal. She called one number. It rang once. "This is Winters," came the voice. Angela didn't waste time. "Where is he?" "Harrison Falls, Virginia," Winters replied. "Detained with no charges. And it's not a mistake, it's coordinated." Angela exhaled slowly. "Is this connected to Obsidian Fence?" A pause. Then, "I think so. There's movement in old files. Encrypted. Keys being reused. People who were supposed to be gone are active again." Angela didn't need the full picture yet. She knew what mattered. Her husband, the most disciplined, loyal, and honorable man she'd ever known, had been targeted. Not for anything. He did wrong, but because of who he was and what he stood for, and whoever was behind it, had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. She opened her secure laptop, keyed in a code she hadn't used in years, and accessed a database most lawyers would never know existed. It was an archive of old military disciplinary cases, sealed by request of the Department of Defense. But Angela had clearance, not because it was given, because she earned it. Years ago, she fought for access to expose how bias shaped military career outcomes for officers of color. That fight had nearly ended her career. Now, it might save her husband's life. She searched one name, Dorian Vance, and there it was. A dishonorable discharge, buried under layers of classification. Once a rising military strategist. Later accused of operating an unsanctioned black ops unit inside the U.S., targeting internal cultural threats. That was their language. Throigir, real translation? Minority leaders, voices for reform, anyone they deemed disruptive. Angela leaned back in her chair, a thought forming in her mind. She picked up her phone and called a contact she swore she'd never use again. Senator Chase's office, came the receptionist's voice. This is Angela Brooks. Tell Arlen it's about Obsidian Fence. He has 2 minutes. Less than 1 minute later, she heard his voice. Angela, I didn't expect... Cut it, she said. I know you were part of the oversight committee that authorized Obsidian Fence. I have the documents. Your name's on at least 3 of them. There was silence. She let it hang for a moment before continuing, her voice sharp but controlled. My husband has been detained, illegally. There's an operation happening inside U.S. borders, military-trained, well-funded, and possibly using government resources. If I go public with what I have, your career's over. What do you want? Chase asked, voice tight. Pentagon access, full clearance, and a formal congressional inquiry into the Harrison Falls Police Department. I want it started today, or I bury you. You're playing a dangerous game. I'm not playing anything, she said. You are. I'm ending it. By the time she hung up, the wheels had already started turning. Angela didn't stop there. She called an old journalist friend, someone she trusted, someone who knew how to follow money trails in the dark. She sent him encrypted files, surveillance contracts, payment logs, offshore accounts tied to Shell. Companies, all pointing back to Harrison Falls. Start digging, she told him, and be ready. You're going to want this story. Back in Harrison Falls, inside that dim station, Elijah hadn't moved much, but Officer James had. Something in her had shifted. She'd seen his ID. She'd watched how calm he remained. Not like a man guilty of anything, but like someone calculating every move. She walked past the evidence room and paused. The computer terminal blinked quietly. She glanced around. No one was watching. She slipped inside. It only took 10 minutes to confirm what she feared. No official charges, no arrest documentation. Body cam footage showed no resistance. Everything, screamed cover-up. She copied the footage to a private cloud account. Then, against her better judgment, she snapped a photo of a document left on Riggs's desk. It showed a strange military insignia, a black fence around 3 stars. She didn't know what it meant, but she had a feeling. Angela Brooks would, and she was right. Because when Angela received the photo, she stared at it for a long, hard moment, her jaw tightening, her fingers gripping the edge of her desk. She recognized it immediately. That was the logo of a unit her husband had personally taken down 20 years ago, and if they were using that insignia again, then this wasn't just personal revenge, it was a resurrection of everything they once fought to destroy. Angela opened a new document, eyes narrowed. At the top, she typed, Operation Truth Storm. This fight wouldn't be private anymore. Not for long. The sky over Harrison Falls was changing. The soft gold of afternoon had faded into a muted gray, and a warm wind swept in through the narrow streets, the kind of wind that whispers something's coming. Inside a bare motel room just 2 blocks from the police station, General Elijah Brooks stood, in silence, watching the curtains flutter. His duffel bag had been delivered by one of the officers, probably as a way to avoid more trouble. Inside it, a change of clothes, a backup device, and something most people never noticed. A flat, black case no bigger than a notebook. He opened it quietly. Inside were military-grade devices, encrypted drives, a pocket transmitter, a folded map with coded notes. The motel wasn't much. Cheap furniture, flickering light, low water pressure, but that didn't matter. Elijah didn't need luxury, he needed a base. He pushed the desk against the wall and started pinning up papers. He drew on his memory, names, dates, symbols. He drew a circle around one word, obsidian fence. Under it, he wrote 2 more. Dorian. Vance. A name he hadn't said out loud in years. Elijah remembered the first time he saw Vance's name on a unit roster. They were young, hungry, brilliant. Vance had been his second in command during a high-risk assignment overseas. Tactical genius, ruthless, and eventually, corrupted. When Elijah had reported Vance's unauthorized side ops, when he exposed how they were targeting civilians based on race, ideology, and background, it wasn't just a professional move. It was a declaration of war. Now, 20 years later, the ghost had returned. And this time, it wasn't just about revenge. It was about building something dangerous. Elijah's phone buzzed. A message. No sender ID. Check the tower logs. Midnight deliveries. Old sawmill. He didn't need to guess who sent it. Officer James had found her courage. He marked the sawmill on the map. Then he opened a second message. This one was from his wife, Angela. It simply said, "Senator Chase is folding. Files moving. Be careful. They're watching." He smiled faintly. That was her way of saying the knife is at their throat. He sent back one line. "I'm not running," because Elijah Brooks had never run from anything. Not in Kandahar. Not in Mosul. Not in Congress. And not now. He powered up the encrypted comms device and keyed in a set of digits, a sequence he hadn't used in over a decade. The device blinked, then a soft ping. It was live. He whispered, "This is Ember. Lead! Stand by for shadow recall." 10 seconds later, the device buzzed. 1 response, then 3, then more. One by one, across the country, former members of his old intelligence team were replying to a code they thought they'd never hear again. Standing by. Got the signal. Location? You say the word, we move. Some of them had left the service. Some still worked quietly in federal roles. One ran a security firm in Chicago. Another taught middle school science and had buried his combat past completely, but none of them hesitated, because they all knew who Elijah was. And if he was calling, then something bigger than politics was on the line. Within hours, 2 of them arrived in Harrison Falls under cover of night. One was tall, with graying hair, quiet eyes, and the kind of calm that only comes from years in war zones. The other was stockier, sharp-tongued, and carried a duffel full of tracking tech. They entered the motel without a word. Hugs could come later. Right now, intel first. Elijah briefed them with pinpoint clarity. The arrests, the phone call, the signal, the mayor's movements, the sawmill deliveries, Officer James's tip, Angela's confirmation that Vance was operating again. They didn't ask why. They just listened, nodded, and began setting up. In less than an hour, the motel room became a makeshift command post. One wall had surveillance maps. Another had digital feeds from local traffic cams they'd quietly tapped. A third held a timeline of events, from the gas station arrest to the activation of Falcon Lock. They called it what it was, a strategic hit wrapped in small-town politics, and it was only the beginning. "Look at the delivery records," the tech guy said, pulling up screenshots. "Multiple shipments to the sawmill, masked through public works invoices. But the crates? Military dimensions. They're building something." "They're not just targeting me," Elijah said. "They're building a network, a structure, maybe a militia." The older man looked up. "Then the question is, who else is on their list?" Elijah turned to the map again. He circled 3 towns. All had recently unexplained traffic stops involving officers of color. All near old training facilities. All with newly hired police from unknown backgrounds. "This is bigger than revenge," he said. "They're preparing for something." Back at the station, Officer James was careful. She'd been moved to desk duty, but that didn't stop her from watching. She listened, she read, and what she saw made her sick. New officers being hired without background checks, meetings late at night, a file she wasn't supposed to see, one that included Elijah's name, along with a long list of others, targets. She copied what she could onto a USB. She knew it could end her career, but she also knew she didn't sign up to serve cowards. At midnight, she slipped the USB under a bench at the town park. An old code. Knock had been agreed on. 3 taps. Pause. 2 taps. Elijah retrieved it an hour later. Quiet. No words. Just a nod to the shadows as he walked away. He uploaded the files. Names. Photos. Assignments. Many of them were officers like him. Reformed. Leaders? Minorities who had risen too fast according to someone else's standards. He looked at his team. "This isn't just about stopping a plan," he said. "It's about exposing a system. One that's still alive, still operating, and still afraid of men like us standing too tall." No one replied. They didn't need to, because they'd all felt it. The quiet ceilings, the unspoken rules, the punishments that didn't look like punishment but kept people in their place. And now someone had turned that silent system into something armed, something coordinated, and Elijah? He wasn't going to just survive it, he was going to burn it down. The forest outside Harrison Falls was quiet, too quiet for the kind of operation Elijah knew was happening inside it. No crickets, no rustle of birds, just the whisper of wind through trees, and the faint buzz of a surveillance drone overhead. Elijah crouched behind a line of brush, binoculars steady. His 2 closest team members, both former intelligence operatives, knelt nearby, eyes scanning the perimeter of the abandoned sawmill. Only it wasn't abandoned. Not anymore. The sawmill had become a fortress. Fences, cameras, guards in civilian, clothes wearing earpieces and carrying high-end military weapons. There were even sentry lights on motion sensors, but none facing outward, because this wasn't a defense post. It was a training ground, a rogue one. From a distance, you couldn't see much, just metal buildings, some large containers, a few transport trucks. But through thermal imaging, the truth came alive. 24 armed men, mock urban layouts built inside, a communications array on the roof with encryption codes traced back to Pentagon-grade systems. It wasn't just illegal, it was treason. "Elijah," one of the operatives whispered. "They're using comms bands reserved for DoD. Someone on the inside is feeding this operation. Someone high." Elijah didn't blink. He'd suspected it for days. This wasn't just a personal vendetta from a disgraced officer. This was being allowed to happen, funded, protected, and the deeper he looked, the more one name kept appearing, like a stain that refused to wash out. Dorian Vance. The former colonel had vanished years ago after being discharged. No charges. No jail, just gone. Erased. A man like that doesn't just disappear. He goes underground. And now, Elijah knew where he'd re-emerged. The last time they'd seen each other, Elijah had stripped Vance of command. Now? It looked like Vance was building his own. They had enough proof to go public: body cam footage, documents, financial trails. Angela had already begun preparing the legal case. Officer James had exposed the compromised local police. Everything was moving. Then Elijah's phone buzzed. No name, no number, just a video link. He tapped it. Angela's face filled the screen, eyes wide, a bruise blooming across her temple, her hands bound behind a chair, then a voice. Cold, familiar. "Hello, General. Vance." Elijah's jaw clenched, but his face stayed calm. "I thought we should do this face-to-face, or at least screen-to-screen," Vance continued, stepping into the frame behind Angela. "You ruined my life, Elijah. You exposed my work, destroyed my career. You thought you won." Angela shifted in the chair but didn't speak. Elijah watched everything: her body language, her breathing, the background. Brick walls, old wiring, a flicker of sunlight through a boarded window. He made a mental note. "That's not the sawmill. This is somewhere else." "You're going to come to me, alone," Vance said. "No weapons, no backup, no tricks, or your wife dies. 6 hours. Location coordinates will follow. Make the right choice." The video ended. Elijah didn't move. One of his team members leaned forward. "It's a trap." Elijah nodded. "Of course it is. Then we plan for it." He stood slowly. "We do, but I'm going in first. He wants me alone. I'll give him alone. You'll be my shadows." They gathered in the motel room that night, their war room: maps, tactical gear, secure comms. Angela's laptop open, still downloading files she'd secured before she was taken. The team had triangulated the video background using weather patterns and power grid signatures. They found the place, an old military training facility, decommissioned, forgotten, deep in the woods. It was perfect. Of course it was. Vance had chosen it on purpose. Back when they were both young officers, Elijah and Vance had trained there together, ran drills, sweated through war games, became brothers, or so Elijah had believed at the time. Now it was the place chosen for their final move. "Why there?" one of the operatives asked. Elijah stared at the map. "Because it's personal," he said. "He wants to finish where it began." The morning of the confrontation, the team loaded into separate vehicles, each heading toward the facility by different routes. Officer James had provided updated police patrol patterns to avoid checkpoints. They wore no uniforms, no insignias, just conviction. Before leaving, Elijah recorded a final message on a secure flash drive and gave it to his second-in-command. "If I don't come back, release it. Everything. Angela's files, the surveillance logs, the names, the documents." "You will come back," the man said quietly. Elijah smiled faintly. "Hope so. But we don't build plans on hope." At sunrise, he arrived at the facility's edge. Alone. No weapon. Just his military ID and wedding ring. The gates opened for him. He walked inside, step by step, calm and focused. The building swallowed him in silence. Dark hallways, the scent of old concrete and machine oil. No signs, no guards visible. Just that quiet, red, the kind that told him eyes were everywhere. Then Vance appeared, grayer, leaner, but unmistakably him. He wore civilian clothes, but carried himself like a man still in uniform, just without rules now. "You came," he said, almost impressed. Elijah didn't answer. Vance led him through the old corridors, into a room that once served as a command hub. There sat Angela, tired but strong, still upright, still proud. "You let her go," Elijah said. "Not a question. A demand." "In time," Vance said. After you record a message, you'll confess to treason, to corruption. You'll say your entire career was engineered to promote racial division in the military. And then you disappear. Elijah stared at him, then at Angela, then at the cameras around the room, and then he said something that stopped Vance cold. Obsidian fence folds at sunrise. It was an old phrase, a kill switch code, one they'd created decades ago as a failsafe. Vance froze. "What did you do?" he whispered. "I did what you never expected," Elijah said calmly. "I planned for this. If I don't leave this building in 3 hours, every file you buried goes public. Every video, every transfer, every connection. Angela's team already sent copies to 4 newsrooms. The timer's running." The rage on Vance's face twisted into something unhinged. "You were always one step ahead," he growled. "That ends now." But behind the walls, Elijah's team was already moving. They'd infiltrated the facility through maintenance tunnels. Officer James was jamming external comms. The old training ground had become a battlefield again. But this time, Elijah wasn't a young recruit. He was the storm. The sun was just beginning to rise. It filtered weak gold through the broken windows of the old military training facility. Dust floated in the air like ash. The silence before the storm. Elijah stood in the center of the main chamber, the room that once trained soldiers in strategy, discipline, and honor. Now, it housed betrayal. Angela sat nearby, still restrained, but her eyes were locked on her husband. Calm, confident. She knew something the others didn't. So did he, because Elijah Brooks had never walked into a trap without setting one of his own. Across the facility, his team moved silently through shadowed corridors and forgotten stairwells. They had memorized the blueprints overnight, studied every vent, every blind spot. Now, each one of them was in position, trained for this, prepared. At the same time, Vance paced like a man unraveling. "You had to make this messy, didn't you?" he said, his voice rising. "You could have walked away. You could have let the past die." Elijah didn't flinch. "You never wanted the past to die. You built your whole plan on it." Vance barked a bitter laugh. "You were the one. The poster boy. The clean face of progress. They fast-tracked you, Elijah. Pushed you to the front to make the system look fair." "No," Elijah replied, his voice steady. "I earned every stripe, every post, every sleepless night. What they didn't give me, I built myself." "You think this ends with an upload?" Vance spat. "The people behind this, the money, the politics, the silent agreements, they'll bury your story like they buried the rest." Elijah stepped forward, eyes sharp. "Not this time." And then, as if on cue, the walls came alive. Projectors lit up, inside the facility, on the monitors, on the tactical boards Vance used to plot his conspiracy. A video feed, the entire confession Vance had just given, the demands, the threats, the plan, everything, broadcast live. Angela smiled. "We were already recording." From a hidden pin on her blouse, a micro-recorder had captured the entire conversation. At the same time, Elijah's team remotely triggered the final release protocol from their secure laptop hidden in the woods outside the building. Across the internet, on encrypted military forums, investigative journalist feeds, and 2 major news sites, the Obsidian fence files began uploading: personnel records, authorization signatures, body cam footage, training ground blueprints, everything Vance and his shadow network had built, now exposed to the world. Vance lunged for Angela in rage, but Elijah moved faster. In one precise motion, he slammed Vance to the ground, pinning him down. "You don't get to touch her," he said quietly. "Not after this." Sirens wailed in the distance. Not local police this time. Federal task forces, sent by the Pentagon after Colonel Winters secured a last-minute override with Joint Command. "Time's up," Elijah said. But it wasn't over yet. Not for Vance. From the floor, breathing hard, The disgraced colonel whispered, "You'll never stop all of us." "I don't have to," Elijah replied. "You just showed them who you are." Outside, armored SUVs pulled up fast. Tactical units moved in, sweeping the perimeter. Inside, Elijah's team signaled clear. Angela was released, unharmed. Vance was cuffed. This time for real. The agents hesitated when approaching Elijah. He stood tall, hands open. "I'm not resisting, but I'm not running either." One of the agents nodded. "Orders from the top. You're coming with us, for protection." Angela joined him. Her voice was firm. "We go together." As they were escorted out, cameras captured the moment. Not hidden ones, real ones. Media. Because while the operation unfolded, journalist Reggie Mathesy, the one Angela had tipped off earlier, had been watching the feed from a safe house. When the files hit the open web, he released the story of a lifetime. General. Wrongfully arrested exposes shadow network targeting black officers. By morning, the story was everywhere. Social media exploded. The Pentagon launched an internal review. Congress demanded hearings. Senator Chase, now publicly exposed for signing off on Obsidian Fence, was forced to resign, and in cities across the country, other officers came forward. People who had felt the quiet pressure, the unexplained reassignments, the reviews that never made sense. Now they had proof. Now they had a voice. Back in Harrison Falls, the police department was placed under federal supervision. Officer James? She was promoted and assigned to a National Integrity Task Force. Her first job, dismantling everything Sergeant Riggs had built. Riggs was arrested. The evidence against him? Overwhelming. Between the doctored reports, planted files, and connections to Vance, he had nowhere to hide. And the mayor? Gone. Disappeared the day after the raid. Some say he boarded a private flight. Others say he was just another pawn in a bigger game. Either way, Elijah didn't care, because the truth was out. Weeks later, at a cabin near Lake Mitchell, Elijah finally sat still. Really still. Angela beside him, holding his hand as they watched the water move. "Keep thinking about that day," she said softly. "The gas station. How simple it was. How fast it turned." Elijah nodded. "That's how it always happens. Injustice never screams at first. It whispers." He took a breath. The air smelled like pine and possibility. "You think they'll come again?" she asked. "Maybe," he said. "But next time, we won't be waiting. We'll be watching." He paused, because now they know. Some of us don't kneel. Some of us don't forget. Angela smiled. Some of us fight back. He looked out over the lake, and for the first time in a long time, the war inside him quieted. He didn't need medals. He didn't need speeches. He had truth. And sometimes, that was enough.